Welcome to Digication Scholars Conversations. I'm your host, Jeff Yan. In this episode, you will hear part one of my conversation with Kate LaBore from University of Illinois, Urbana, Champaign. More links and information about today's conversation can be found on Digication's Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Full episodes of Digication Scholars Conversations can be found on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Welcome to Digication Scholars Conversations. I'm your host, Jeff Yan. My guest today is Kate LaBore. She is the Technology and Media Professional at Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning at University of Illinois, Urbana, Champaign. Hi, Kate. Welcome.
Hi, Jeff.
So, Kate, thank you for being here. You and I actually scheduled to have this conversation like maybe a month and a half ago or something like that. But you got into an accident and broke your wrist, and therefore we
elbow.
couldn't talk.
My elbow.
Your elbow.
I broke my elbow.
That's
Right. I was in a
Well,
sling for a few weeks.
I hope you're all feeling better now.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I'm still in physical
Yeah.
therapy, but it's improving.
Well, I'm glad to hear, and I and thank you for rescheduling and joining us again. We've worked together for a little while now because do you remember when did we start working with Illinois?
Oh, I think you may have
With
started
portfolios?
working with Illinois for about a year before I was on this
Uh-huh.
assignment.
Okay.
So I started working with Digication in 2015. And I was
Yeah.
asked by CETL to do this as a support for the provost's office that had brought Digication onto campus.
Right. And
Right.
CETL, for those who don't know, is
Center
the
for
Center
Innovation in
for
Teaching and
Innovation.
Learning. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And now you serve a very large university, and with large population, but also with large ambitions, and with lots of programs. I I hope you don't mind me sharing this, and if you do, we'll cut this part off. There are. I just sort of took a look before our meeting. There are over 20,000 portfolios and over 150,000 portfolio pages in the
Wow.
system. Did you know that? Yeah.
No, I didn't. I try to audit
So yeah,
in the spring, I try to look at what portfolios have been created in the
mhm,
12 months since the last time I looked.
yeah,
And of
yeah,
those, I use some sorting
yeah,
mechanisms and then
mhm,
some, just going in and looking at some of them to
yeah,
choose some number of them to add to our portfolio showcase. So we're looking for
yeah,
portfolios where students have, gone a little bit above and beyond, or something that's unique and new, or an instructor who's trying something with portfolios that's new. So I have some awareness of it, but it's hard
yeah,
to follow it all.
yeah.
There's a
Well,
lot.
it's a large program, a lot of people, and I I feel like that I've seen just off the top of my head, engineering. There's a FYE program. What's it called? The LAS
Yeah,
course.
it's called Design Your First Year Experience. Yeah.
Hmm.
And that class alone,
Capstone study abroad. Yeah.
yeah, that ca
Go ahead.
that LAS 101 class alone typically has an enrollment of around 2,000 students in the fall.
Yeah.
They run it in the fall. Sometimes they run it in the spring if they have a cohort of people who come in the spring, but usually it's just run in the fall. And uh, they have a requirement that all the students do a portfolio. So, we
Yeah.
have
Mhm.
a lot of portfolios coming out of that
Yeah.
program.
So it's really I mean it's incredible to see, first of all, and it's is it's astonishing to see, scale at work. I mean, just to give you some sense, when we started Digication, um, it was for my own classroom of 12 students. But even for my entire institution, we only had a little over 2,000 students, the entire, school. And so
Right.
for you to just mention that this one class is 2,000 students, it's really
Yeah,
mind-boggling,
of
for
course,
me always.
that's the intake class for
Yep,
the
yep.
largest college on our campus. Like, LAS is an order of magnitude larger than any of our
Mhm.
other colleges. So there's
Right.
that, and then this is it's what the course is what used to be called a student success course. So
Hmm.
it's designed to help students make the transition from being high school students to being college students.
Mm.
And so they
Right.
cover a lot of ground, and a lot of what they cover is orienting students to, like, the hundreds of resources that are available to them at the University of Illinois. And I like to tell people, an institution that considers itself a research institution and is, like, in a competitive space as far as research is concerned.
Yeah.
The University of Illinois puts a lot of resources into undergraduate teaching. They
Hmm.
fund the entire Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning, for one thing, that's a big part of that. They want to make sure that students have everything that they need to succeed, even if they don't go on to become graduate students and do research.
And I would agree to that and attest to that, because I've actually met a lot of uh, graduates from your institution, who um, who have basically said that very thing to me, which is, this is an institution where I felt like I could participate in research, even though I mean, they basically, I'm not a PhD material, but having that experience had made them better learners and better, just a better performer overall, having seen the rigor of what research, sort of at a graduate level would have looked like, even though as an
Right.
undergrad they might never have had that experience, which is really awesome. So, um, I wanted to maybe ask you a little bit about just being in this big institution. Again, like I said, it's got a it's not only that it's large in terms of size, but it also, you have always high ambitions, and doing things well, doing things right. Um, how do you do that? I mean, rolling out, I mean, such as just like rolling out a portfolio program for so many people. I mean, the idea of just saying, "Hey, let's just go and roll out portfolio for this course as over 2,000 students." It's pretty intimidating, you know.
Well, what makes it possible? What makes it possible is the LMS. And I don't think we'd have nearly as much adoption of Digication if it wasn't integrated with. Now Canvas is now our main LMS. When we first started working with Digication, we had both Moodle and Blackboard. And Blackboard is being completely replaced by Canvas. And as a result, many of the Moodle users are also coming over to Canvas because they're hearing from colleagues that, oh, Canvas is great and it's so much easier. And for particularly for courses that use Portfolio, Canvas is a better choice. It handles the roster for them, and um, if the course has a lot of sections, we used to have a lot of problems with that with Blackboard. And
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
there's something about Canvas. I don't understand the way that Canvas works completely, but they seem to have a better infrastructure for these multi-section courses. And that's
Hmm.
where we have these large enrollment classes like LAS 101. And we would not,
Right.
and
Right.
even the engineering courses that you mentioned are like between 120 and 200 students. So for instructors to be able to handle that and for them to be able to, you know, have a reasonable workload for their teaching assistants, they really need those Canvas tools. And the more work that instructors can do relevant to portfolios, the more of the work that they can do of assessment in the LMS, that it makes it so much easier and so much more likely that they are going to use that.
Yeah. Now you had mentioned just now these engineering course.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of people. I would say that I was one of these people many years ago. Was sort of biased to think that, oh, the engineers will not value the portfolios, and why would they do that? And because it was sort of born from the, at least for me, like literally born from the arts and in art school, right? Um, and it wasn't biased in that, like, it just, I just always had thought, oh, that's, it's like the wrong tool for the job,
Well,
but
it
as I have, yeah, go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say engineers are, like, tool skeptical from the get. They tend to think of, like, every tool that they look at, they're like, "Well, it's okay, it's got this and it's got that, but, I don't know if it's the right tool for the job," because they're aware of all these tools, and, in fact, I think the engineering courses that used education, they also just let students choose. If they don't wanna use Digication, they can use WordPress or whatever, They don't really care, they're not tool focused in that way, but they're always really skeptical about it. I have never seen anybody just like think that a technology is just wonderful from the jump because they always have more questions than anybody else about it. They see more of the flaws.
But the thing though that I was always, thinking about was even more on the conceptual part, because a
Mhm.
lot of the work that in the arts, has a lot of very touchy feely, reflective, components, and uh, and it feels like it's all about expression. And now, like I said, I was one of those people, but I over the years I've been thoroughly convinced by lots of people, including folks from Illinois, um, that look, engineers are incredibly creative and expressive as well, but they just express it in different ways, right? So, can you
Yeah.
talk about a little bit about the ways that your engineers, build portfolios, whether it's in education or elsewhere?
Yeah, well, I don't actually work for the College of Engineering, so I have limited contact with them. But I will say that my background prepared me very well for working with engineers in general. Because when I was a graduate student, I was in the social sciences. I became an anthropologist, and uh, uh, right out of graduate school, I got a job working for an engineering research unit at the University of Southern California. The Information Sciences School has um, I'm sorry, it's the Viterbi School of Engineering. The Information Sciences Institute is the research arm, and I was the only non-engineer on that team. And part of the reason they hired me was because I did have a background in social science and I knew how to do ethnographic research, and and I also had a media production background. So they thought they felt they were getting like two things in one person, somebody who could
Well,
handle.
doesn't
Yeah,
everyone
everybody
in
wants
USC
that. Right. But so
have to have it?
they thought, well, we can get somebody who can produce media and who can do focus groups and user testing. And that's what I did for 9 years. I did, all that stuff. Larger projects. I supervised a team of graphic designers and animators and artists and engineers, like engineering students who wrote the code. I would work directly with them, and I would also work with users, and I would do requirements analysis and some cultural stuff. Like for instance, we produced a program, an AI driven program for language learning. This was under a DARPA grant, just before just before we went into Iraq, or right after we went into
Wow.
Afghanistan, and they wanted to be able to train um, military personnel in how to conduct like a basic conversation in Pashto or a basic conversation in Iraqi Arabic that would follow the kind of script that the military uses for what they call meet and greet. And so we had to train them to do like a pretty robust dialogue that would cover the things that they needed to do, which is not as difficult as it sounds, just because the military does kind of script everything out. So we had a very constrained domain, but we still had to have a corpus of like, okay, so you're talking to an Iraqi person and you ask this question, and here are some of the responses you get. You need to be able to respond to each of those responses. So it does kind of, it gets big really fast. And so part of my job was to work with the military people on the one side and our Iraqi experts on the other side, our Iraqi Arabic experts, to populate that tree, so to speak, of like, well, what if the soldier says this? What would an Iraqi person say? Okay, is there anything else that they might say, or what else might they be thinking about? So we had to kind of delve in there, and so I spent 9 years working with, I think, engineers are some of the most creative people on the planet. It was really fun working there. It was like working with inventors. You're working with these very, very inventive people. So when I came to the University of Illinois, I came almost directly from that background.
Mhm. So it's almost like, look, these highly creative people, highly inventive people, they all have a lot to say and actually a lot to tell.
Mhm.
And it's just that they need to find their own sort of way to express that. And it may look different from a painter or a poet, but
Yeah,
nevertheless, they are still expressing that. And I think that's
right.
really true in, looking at how portfolios have sort of gone over so many different fields in different ways, because I think the same thing can be said to the teachers, to the nursing majors, to
Yeah,
to
and
to,
and
to a
and
lot of folks.
for better and for worse, because now we're hearing a lot about algorithmic bias, and the engineers who create AI algorithms, yeah, it's great that they're creative, but on the other hand, it can be the source of problems. But that's
It
getting
comes with
kind
a
of far away
personality.
from teaching and
It comes
learning.
with a personality, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So now, having that said, I want to actually go back for a minute to talk about you talk about undergraduate research, and I know that you're doing like capstone projects or study abroad. There's all these programs. I mean, like Illinois is like encapsulated like basically all of the high impact practices and sort of making them all work there, like more or less, like all really well. It
Nobody's doing
feels.
that consciously. I mean, they're doing what they do, but like we know that in some of these programs,
Yeah,
the department has a requirement of a capstone course. So then they find somebody to teach it, but they don't think of it as, oh, I'm doing a high impact practice here. Some do, maybe, but I think a lot of others are just doing you know, what they're told to do, basically.
or what they've always felt, right, that this is
Yeah.
certainly long as a tradition, and to a certain extent the high impact practices comes from the practices, right? And
Yeah,
so
well, I
um
learned it took me a while, but I finally learned my lesson about that, Stop
mhm,
talking about
right,
high impact practices. Nobody wants to hear that.
right, because this is our practice already, we've been doing
Right,
this.
right. We're
um
not gonna change just because somebody's made a list of 10 things,
right. But I think it's amazing to see how many of these things naturally have had a fit, and I think that's
Mhm.
actually almost like a validation on both sides, if there's such a thing, right? it
Yeah.
it validates a little bit of the, well, high impact practice actually comes from something, very legitimate, and it's
Yeah.
practiced and it's proved. But that it also, it's a little bit of that great minds think alike, sort of situation.
Yeah.
So I think that's actually quite interesting. And I say this only because I I know that one of the um, popular things or even theories that people have is, um, of course, I've done a lot more, studying on ePortfolios than others, than in the other areas, that it can serve as sort of this meta practice where when it
Right.
pairs with some other practices, it tends to sort of
But you have to
amplify.
have
It's sort of this
instructors to
amplifier,
buy you have to have
right?
instructors that buy into that as a model, and very
That's
few of
true.
our instructors are even aware of it as a model, and there's no we don't have any way of promoting it. I mean, we promote certain teaching practices. We have, a seminar series that instructors can come to on their lunch hour where instructors who are using a technology and really digging it, they can come and they can give a presentation about it, and then you might see a small uptake in that particular whatever it is, whether it's a teaching method or a technology or whatever. But so a lot of people don't have any way of finding out what portfolios can do for them, and what keeps me going is the occasional people who do get it. That's when they do. It's really exciting when they do. And I think of particular individuals who have been really, really good at this. Some of whom are still doing it. Some of whom have left. They've either left the university or they've left the department or whatever.
Right, right. Um, so if you have your magic wand and you are, given your wish, like, what is your ideal way of promoting it, right? To the
That's a good
faculty that you
question.
feel like you could reach.
Well, it would be something like one of those lunch hour uh,
Hmm.
seminars, and that
Hmm.
means that you have to find an instructor who not only do they think that they're not only are they having a great success with it in their class, but they have to feel like the reason for their success is the portfolio pedagogy specifically, right? So you want
Mm.
them to you'd want them to say, here's what portfolios have done for my class, and
Mm.
then come out with some really positive, you
Mhm.
know, um,
Yeah.
evidence of it. Um,
And I mean, that's it, it's, I think it's wonderful, by the way, because it, you coming from such a collegial way of thinking about it, and I've always thought highly of you and how you're very modest and humble, but you actually get a lot done. And I think that it is because of that, right? um, you're basically saying, well, we want someone authentic to
yeah,
come in and talk about it in a very sort of um, uh, sort of not overly formal. We're not saying let's go in and do a lecture series,
yeah, yeah,
formally and make brochures about it. But it's more like, hey, we can have a bunch of lunch series where they can share and learn and have lunch,
right.
and bring a sandwich, and it's something very grounded about that kind of feel.
Yeah, I'd like to tell you about a project, about a project that I've been working on that, this is something that I've been wanting to do for a long time with Digication, is to integrate it more tightly with one of our own technologies. This was something that was invented and built at the University of Illinois, and it's an online textbook, right? So it's called eText, and it's a great way for um, instructors to go kind of beyond what they can get in the LMS as far as content presentation. Like that's what eText is good for, is content presentation. It's all about that. Although it does have active components. We can put interactive components in it, so you can have something like a workbook in there, and we have some texts that show that. Um, but uh, we just produced a book, and this is in the arts. So, back to your thing about portfolios in the arts. And I think maybe it's because artists get it about portfolios. They don't have to be convinced because, they've been doing portfolio based stuff for, their whole careers. But we have this instructor who was the one who wrote this e-text, and he had used Digication in his courses previously, and he wanted to continue using it. And one of the things that he very strongly believes in is that there are particular moments when students are consuming the content, when it's a good point to ask them to reflect, and that is kind of like, if you don't do it, then you kind of lose that opportunity. It's gone, because you can have them go back and reflect, but you're not going to get the quality of answers that you do when you ask for this reflection at the right time. And so, I had been pushing for quite a while to have links in the e-text that would take students right into their portfolio. So if you have a reflection assignment for chapter 3, and you click on that link, you go into the page of the portfolio that is set aside for the chapter 3 reflection. And because this is the wonderful thing about the templating capabilities that Digication has, that we would not be able to do that. We would not be able to make that integration if it were not for that templating capability, because you have to have every single portfolio has to have the same URL in it for chapter 3 reflection, right? And the template gives you that. It you're logged into the university's sign-on system. So therefore, when the portfolio opens up to that page, it's your portfolio.
Right, right.
So,
So I think
so
that, yeah, I
yeah,
think that's exciting. That's really exciting.
I'm very excited about it. We're not, we're still working on it, but the instructor is 100% sold on it. And what I'm
I love,
hoping is that we can get him to do that kind of presentation, but it's going to have to
yeah,
wait for another term, because um, he's doing a course in the fall that just got approved as a gen ed requirement, and that's where he really wants to implement this. So we're not going to see that course until fall of 2022, and then maybe we can get him on the agenda for spring 2023. It's been a long time coming. I've been wanting to do this for a long time, and we're now seeing the potential for, I mean, I finally managed to convince the eText people that, yeah, it's worth doing this, and partly because this instructor asked for it. If this instructor, I needed an instructor to say, I really want this, because I
yes,
couldn't
yes,
get them to build it until we had like a case, a use case
yeah.
for it.
Well, I guess that, it is a long time coming, but it's I think it's worth it. And I think that it really is not just a stronger case, but I think you get a lot of the nuance and the details right when someone in the trenches actually using it
Hmm.
and saying,
Yeah.
this is what I need.
Hmm.
Because otherwise you end up potentially, I mean, we've been the victim on that ourselves too. We
Right.
anticipate people wanting this and then they're like, no, we don't really need it. And then we end up spending so much time building that thing that no one wants. And so I love that, and I actually really like what you were saying, which is it's about the timing of the reflection. Because
Yeah, in
with all
this
the
case,
people
yeah.
that like reflections, and so really study that part of learning and how it impacts our learning.
Yeah, we had
The
some
timing of
similar
it is, yeah.
We got some similar insights when we were doing the study abroad program, and one of the things that they emphasized with reflections is the importance of writing the right kind of prompts. And in fact, they had a graduate student researcher who was working with the program who really paid attention to that, including like tweaking the prompts semester after semester. He would tweak them a little bit, and they were getting better and better responses from students. And he figured out a prompt writing methodology that that really works. And so there's the two things: the good prompts and the timing, where those prompts are, and those two things are. If you have those two things, you're gonna get really good responses from students.
This concludes part 1 of our conversation with Kate LaBore from University of Illinois, Urbana, Champaign. To hear part 2, be sure to subscribe to Digication Scholars Conversations on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Digication Scholars Conversations is brought to you by Digication, a technology platform powering the most innovative ePortfolio programs in K-12 and higher education. Our website can be found at digication.com. This episode was produced by Drew Albanesius and Jeff Yan. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please like, subscribe, and share with a friend. Thanks for watching.